I'm Amy Kravitz. My talk is called Creature, and that will become, the reason why will become clear a little on. But the first thought I had when Noelle asked about doing a masterclass was, a real master doesn't teach you about what they do, they teach you about what you do. That's a real master. So this will be primarily an artist talk, but hopefully, especially even at the end, especially if we get to plan B, I can maybe do a little bit of work toward the latter goal. As I mentioned yesterday at the roundtable discussion, in animation, the most important tool is actually your own body, your physical understanding of what you see. Your body has an amazingly rich pool of knowledge in it, most of which you aren't ever really conscious of. But we have deep tools for understanding all kinds of things, movement being one of them. Movement is also essential to, certainly to everything I do in animation, and to most of animation, movement, timing, time. And one of the reasons we have, well, we have that rich pool of knowledge for many, many reasons, but we also have motor neurons in us that are dedicated to the movement we see, mirror neurons, so that we respond not only to our own movement, but to movement we see in others. So I'm going to go back to a very, very, very long time ago, to one of my very first memories. And I have a memory, a very rich memory, of riding a horse. And I think riding a horse, I was less than 2 years old. So I think I was just probably put on the horse, and the horse walked a little bit. But this is my memory of it. It was, the horse's mane was the main thing of what I could see. He was a Palomino horse. His name was Scout. I remember that. And his mane was kind of a flaxen color. I remember the feeling of it in my hands. I remember his rhythm of walking. I remember his movement and his sound, and I was on top of him, and he was an entire moving landscape. And this is a very rich, deep memory that I have. And a couple of years later, my mother, whose first language was not English, so I was 4, a couple of years after that very memorable experience of riding that horse. And she said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I thought, wow. She used the word be. She didn't say do. I said, wow, you can be anything. And I really took it literally, and I thought, I want to be a horse. And I really thought when she asked me that you got to a point in life where you chose what to be and you could transmute into that being. And later on in life, I was disabused of that notion, but that's another memory number 2. Then the other thing I want to just talk about before I really begin is that I started animating when I was very, very young. I made my first animation when I was 11 years old, which is unusual for someone of my age. But I remember shooting my first scene, and I remember more specifically when it came back from the lab. And seeing that footage come back from the lab changed my life forever. I was 11 years old, and I saw that footage, and I was really overwhelmed by the consciousness that something was there that wasn't there before. That was the deep beauty of animation to me, and it overtook me. In a way, that experience is, I guess, what some people, I think people have it at all ages, at all times. You have it when you see something profoundly beautiful or profoundly moving. It's you might call it the infinite aesthetic moment. And it's not that animation was anything great. It was just the realization that there was life in there, that there was something that wasn't there before. There was something alive, and that thing that was alive was not me. That was a very profound, deep realization at that age. So really, I've come to see the process of making films, making art, and animating as coming into a relationship with something that is not you, that is a creature, that is its own living identity. There are ways, what I will talk about methods as we go forward of coming into a conversation, coming into a relationship with that creature, and ways of finding that creature. And I'm going to talk about that in relationship to my own work. So for next film, we're going to look at a film. I'll have to leave my slides and return to them. But we're going to look at a film called River Lethe. The title refers to the mythical river of forgetfulness in the Greek underworld. One thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about your body as an instrument for understanding is that when you look at anything and when you experience anything, you have to look with your whole body. You can see with your back, you can see with your feet, you can see with your hands. Your seeing isn't just these two things here. There's methods of whole body seeing and whole body sensibility. And in this film, River Lethe, this was, there were many things going on that I was working on figuring out with this film, but one of the most important investigations for me was investigating materials and how important the sense of touch was for realizing the animation. And I experimented with a lot of different media. This is, unfortunately, aluminum powder, paper I couldn't see through to animate. I had to animate by eye. A lot of graphite drawing. You can actually see in this photo that some of the drawings, not all of them, some of them are really quite small, but I used different media and actually different papers with different surface properties. I used pigment powder and erasure, and then also a lot of graphite powder with erasure and drawing in it. And these are some examples of that. And there would be a lot of animation I would make and not use, and a lot of editing to find the kind of movement language of the film. So I think we'll scoot ahead forward to my next film, The Trap. Well, first off, one thing I neglected to mention was that I know this is anathema to say here, but I never intended to make abstract work at all in my life. And with River Lethe, as I mentioned, you have to come into a communication with this creature other than yourself. And the film told me in so many words that it needed to be an abstraction in order to be alive. So, and that what I mean by alive is that when I see it on the screen and when I perceive it, it is alive, breathing, an entity unto itself. So with The Trap, I had accepted this harsh reality, being an abstract, or working abstractly, whatever that means. So I had, in a way, some more specific questions to investigate with The Trap. I knew I loved to really draw and really animate, and it was a period, and I also wanted to, one of the things that I really was interested in was as simple as a deep velvety black and a brilliant white, which prior to digital technology was harder than you might think to actually get on film. And I was just really interested in tonality. And I discovered at the time these beautiful drawings by George Seurat. I don't know if you have seen, you're probably familiar with his paintings and this sort of pointillistic idea, but his drawings are transcendent. And they were just they really struck me because they were just surface and tonality and dark tonality shaped by the light coming through, and I was sort of overwhelmed by them. And I got the idea from him, from these drawings, of just purely tonal drawings on a textured surface. So I was trying all these different things, and I do a lot of preparatory drawing, not knowing where I'm going, and a lot of reading. I was reading a lot of Holocaust literature at the time. I was reading all of Elie Wiesel's works, and he talked about the transports of Jews to concentration camps and being packed into cattle cars. They knew they were being deported. They had no idea where they were going. The cattle cars were completely dark inside, absolutely crowded with people, with just the tiniest bits of light coming through. And at one point in one of his books, not this one, but he said that he just would try to, he himself was, of course, imprisoned, but he tried to imagine family members on their journeys, and I tried to imagine that journey too. I was reading a lot and looking at a lot and drawing a lot. I also read Van Gogh's letters at the time, which are intensely beautiful. And he wrote often to his brother Theo, describing his life in detail. At one point, for like 2 pages, he goes on to Theo saying, I have this half a piece of crayon, and he describes this crayon and exactly its properties. Can you find me another one of these, he says to Theo. And I thought, yes, I want that crayon too. It sounds really great. It was not an oil crayon. It was not a Conti crayon. It didn't have the dryness of Conti. It didn't have as oily as oil pastel. It had a very different property, and I was buying every kind of material at the art supply store. Nothing was sort of having that sense of communication and abstraction. And then I discovered these, which are lithographic drawing crayons. And I use the very soft ones of these, and they're really wonderful tools. And I found this textured paper that it wasn't anything. I think the paper Seurat used was this beautiful, expensive paper that wasn't made. I didn't have any budget to get lots of expensive paper, but I did find a paper I could buy in bulk that at least had a laid surface. And unlike sort of George Seurat's loving relationship with the surface of that paper, this paper was not loving at all, but so I sort of fought with it the entire time. But these are some examples of the individual drawings. And of course, all these 2 films are animated, on 2s, meaning in contemporary lingo, that's 12 frames per second. The trap was sort of, and the other thing about the trap that I should mention was, really working with film stocks, so that when it was on screen, it took a lot of tests, getting tests back from the lab, testing different film stocks, and ultimately I found this stock that's not made anymore, but it was a print stock, a high contrast print stock, that finally, when it lived on screen, really was alive to me. The next film we're going to look at is called Roost. So just to recap, in terms of finding this creature, materials investigation of all kinds, sort of researching the emotional landscape of what you think that creature is, and lots of, I guess you might call it drawing the elephant. You try to sort of see all the different parts. And it's very hard you really don't even understand the whole of it, even after you've made it. With Roost, I had been doing a job, and I laid in a sound into I was editing sound, and I laid in a sound, and I heard this. And I thought, and the sound there's certain things that I hear or see, and it can be for other people, it can be for myself, and it just think that's important, and it actually feels, I don't know, it kind of goes through you, and so I have that that's important feeling a lot when I teach, and I have it for myself, I have it for my family, and I thought about this sound, that's important, and that sound indeed was important. And I was reading a lot of I.B. Singer's work, and I came across this story called Cock-a-doodle-doo, which is the English, I don't know what the Spanish rooster says, but the English-speaking rooster says cock-a-doodle-doo. And he actually starts the story by saying all the different, the Lithuanian rooster says this, the Russian rooster says that, but that wherever that is spoken among roosters, it's a declaration of faith. And the story takes place on Yom Kippur among Ashkenazi Jews. I.B. Singer was from Poland. There's this ritual involving killing a fowl. And so he places the story on this day, and the roosters are speaking to each other. And they're basically affirming life with their cry. And it's kind of a beautiful, strange story. And of course, the rooster's crow is dividing night and day. And I've always been very interested in, that sort of veil between night and day, between living and dying, between, all those membranes of human beings. And so I really started thinking about this story. I had also this idea, over this time, I'm a super slow worker. I'm actually super slow at everything, but I work slowly. So, we had moved, we had children, so the film is made over a long period of time. Materials investigation was going slowly. I had the strong feeling that I wanted to work on a very smooth surface of paper, and I found, related to the lithographic crayons, this lithographic rubbing ink. And I found, and this ink, it's made by the same company, but it enables you to kind of spread it on the surface. You can work into the lithographic ink. You can sort of scrape some of it away. It has a very different quality. And so I started making imagery like this. And there was a lot of shooting, a lot of assembly and disassembly, a lot of trying to understand the paper and this material, what I could use to remove the ink, what I could use to lay down the ink, the kind of evocative, what I could evoke with the images. And then I also sort of slowly realized that animation wasn't just continuous movement, it was also discontinuous movement, that was also of movement quality that I could work with. And that was, one of the central understandings of this film. And that brings me to my most recent film, which took a long time to make. And we'll take a look at that now. And it's I'll let it be itself. the hour coat was made over a long, long period of time. And the notions of it changed over that time. So I'm going to show you a bunch of the preparatory sketches. I started with some kind of sense of a neglected garden. I think that was all I knew. And a few years in, the realization came and really dawned on me that, I strongly believe that there is something beyond this life. I don't know what it is, but I have the strong feeling that it does not involve time, that the dimension of time ceases. And those were some of the guiding ideas. So when I started work, I was trying different kinds of materials. I thought maybe I'd want to paint this, maybe work with some color. And these, I did tons of these kind of paintings. And I didn't understand from them how I would get that sense of movement, get that sense of this dimension beyond. And of course, over this time, I'm reading, I'm looking at things, I'm trying to grope around in the darkness. And I ordered this book of essays by Ted Hughes. I ordered a used copy, and it came from this library somewhere in the United States. And the book had this at the bottom, and I thought, it's a place. Certainly place and landscape, the idea of a place-centered idea has always been important in my work. I thought, maybe this is a place. This is a place where we have all been and we will be again. And that idea overtook me, and it's like a very specific place. And in my mind, I called it North Hill. And that was a very vague idea. And I kept reading and researching and drawing, and I came upon sort of these botanical prints and reading about Carl Linnaeus and his taxonomical systems. And he had this idea of a botanical clock, which really intrigued me, which was the idea of an organic clock that, because of flowers bloom at different times of day, that there'd be flowers blooming over time, and nature itself would be keeping this clock. And that gave me a kind of movement idea for some reason. I'm sure that his botanical clock doesn't work this way, but in my mind I had a kind of movement idea associated with this, and I kept looking at more Carl Linnaeus organizations of shapes, which are, of course, very close to animation. And as I say, I do a lot of preparatory drawing. So I did lots of drawings, not knowing what I'm doing. Spend a lot of time just searching around, trying to discover where that creature is, where I see potential, where it's whispering to me. This idea came, I don't know, this drawing just emerged. Sense of movement emerged. I let the drawings sort of go where they will, and I see where they're going, and I see, well, can I animate? Can I actually find materials that I can get a kind of movement from that I'd like? And I try seeing, okay, well, can this translate? Can it translate? And, what does the space look like? What do the drawings look like? And I'll fill sketchbook after sketchbook after sketchbook with different kinds of ideas, and they develop, and they maybe get more developed and more developed. And then eventually I'll realize that I'm avoiding finding that creature, and I have to actually start animating. And just to give you an idea, this is where I work at home, and I choose different sets of materials to help me. This film, I became very interested in different pencils. These are my very favorites. They're Japanese pencils, Mitsubishi Hayuni pencils. Believe me, I've tested a ton. I also tested every kind of sharpener. That's my studio assistant, who helps me at every stage. I would use feather to get the little bits of graphite off the drawings. I do a ton of animation that I never use, boxes and boxes of it. And then I finally found a paper that really was working. It was this particular Canson tracing paper. And what I would do is I could shoot the paper and stack it. And I'd get about 50 sheets stacked. And of course, there's boxes and boxes and boxes of animation for this film. This film has, it's on ones, which means 24 frames per second in digital lingo. And there's about, just in the film, not in all of the preparatory work, but in the film itself, there's about 18,000 drawings. So it took me a long time, and all the clouds, and those are all hand-drawn. So that's a little bit of the process of the hour coat. And my daughter was kind enough she was in Amsterdam at the Rijksmuseum, and in terms of finding the creature, she sent me this image, and it's called Woman Eating Breakfast. It's painted in about 1622 to 24, somewhere in there, but look who's really eating breakfast. So you actually have to nourish the creature that you're in conference with when you are making a work. This is what I'm often looking at while I'm working. That's my studio window on a day like we often have in winter in Providence. And I want to just say a few things. So in animation, there's an inherent collaboration between the maker and the viewer, because animation doesn't really exist. Between one drawing and the next drawing, those are two still drawings. So that sense of movement, that sense of continuity, is actually created by the viewer. The maker makes something like that, but it's as if you throw a ball and the person who catches it on the other side catches a different ball. So there's a collaboration inherent in animation that I think is a very beautiful impossibility. That same collaboration happens between the maker and the film. You ask that creature film questions, and the creature responds back to you. And it's always, for me and for each of you, in a language that only each maker understands, because those creatures choose us. They choose us to make them. So what I thought I would do, let me just see how much more time I have, just the tiniest bit of time. There were two things I wanted to do with you before I conclude. One is, if you'll remember what I said, that talking about my work isn't necessarily teaching. teaching really happens in a very different way, and I'm actually a very committed teacher, and I've taught almost as long as I've made films. But I thought I'd at least, if I have, how late can I go? Okay, so I'll do two things. I'll do first thing first, and we'll see how that goes. But I thought I'd ask all of you to just try to remember. This when I have my intermediate class, we do an icebreaker for everybody to meet each other. And I ask my students to try to remember a movement memory, a movement-based memory. And I think it's most useful if you try to go back as far as you can. For some people, it ends up being not way, way, way back in their childhood, but I think it's really helpful to wake up your body sense, to try to think back. If you can remember a pure movement memory. So that's an assignment for you all to think of that right now. So go back and try to remember a really salient memory. And I want to just suggest to you, as you remember that sensation most likely has a lot of bearing on what you are, on who you are, on what you do, on how you navigate through life. It actually informs a lot. When I talk with the students, when we all share our movement memories, I then know a lot about that student. With some of them, they might have a very harsh movement memory. With some of them, they're water memories. Some of them, they're memories of great freedom. With some of them, they're memories of pain, maybe a fall. So that tells me a lot. So we're not in a classroom situation, so I won't put anybody on the spot, but so I'll let you sort of self-teach in that moment to think about how your movement memory informs your work and the bearing that it has on the work you do, whatever that work is, whether you're a filmmaker or an art maker of any kind, or curator, or someone just interested in anything, that movement memory will be important. So at the very end of the semester, I talk about the phrase once upon a time, which is an English phrase. I don't know what the Catalan or Spanish equivalent of that is. Once upon a time. That's a really odd thing when it comes down to it. In English it is. And it goes to something that really interests me about language and animation, which is that words we use for space and time conflate. We talk about, I'll be there around 3 o'clock, or I can walk around the table. So we can use the same words for time and for space. So we talk about that a little bit. And so I often conclude the semester with them thinking about time. And I give them this one assignment I can give to you right now if you want to do it. You can get it done in about, I give them 12 minutes. I think I'll give you guys 5 minutes. I ask them to write a little story about something they do all the time, something they did for the first time. And I usually give them the semester as the interval to think about. So in your case, I would think about an important interval for you. So for them, it's the semester. For you, it might be like your time here, or it might be, I don't know, so that your time may be marked differently. So you might think about an interval of time. So something you do all the time, something you did for the first time, and something you did for the last time. I'll give you 5 minutes to write about that, and we'll see if anybody wants to share that story. Can we do that? Okay, thank you all very much for coming.